Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to Horsetooth Cinema. So today, when this video is going up, is the day of the Oscars, and I'm not the biggest fan of the Oscars in the world. I think there's a lot of flaws. There's a lot of ways in which it sort of reduces people's perspective of film nowadays. And often now I think they're kind of a symbol of how Hollywood has lost touch with the mainstream a little bit. And so, yeah, I'm not the biggest fan in the world, but it is kind of fun to watch them. I'm having some people over tonight. We're gonna just have fun watching them. And beforehand, I did want to review a few more movies that that are going to be nominated for awards tonight that I wanted to catch up with. There's still quite a few movies I haven't seen that will be nominated tonight. For example, I haven't seen Tar still. I haven't seen Aftersun. I haven't seen Triangle of Sadness. I haven't seen that documentary, All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, which I really wanted to check out. But yeah, I did. There are a few that I caught up with super recently that I just wanted to do a little catch-up review for. And the first one I'm going to be talking about is EO, directed by Jerzy Skolimowski. I'm really sorry if I'm butchering that. This is kind of being talked about as the Donkey movie. It is essentially a reimagining of Robert Bresson's Alcazar Balthazar. It's very much inspired by that at the very least. It's not exactly a remake of it, but it's essentially about how the world is a mysterious place when seen through the eyes of an animal. And this tells the story of EO, who is a donkey with very melancholic eyes, and he meets good and bad people on his life's path, experiences joy and pain, endures the wheel of fortune randomly turn in his luck into disaster and despair, into unexpected bliss. But not even for a moment does he lose his innocence. So this is a Polish film. It's nominated in the Best International Feature category. And I think Jerzy Skolimowski, I haven't seen any of his other movies, but I've really been wanting to check out some of his, like Deep End, for a while. And I was really looking forward to this one. I couldn't really find it in a theater near me. It's been kind of a difficult release to find. But now that it's finally on streaming, I got a chance to see it, and oh boy was I blown away. The Oscars gets a lot of flack for recognizing movies that are, you know, sort of reinforcing the more of the same rather than really reinventing the form. And I don't think EO is going to win anything tonight, but I think it should, because I was just blown away with how purposeful the filmmaking techniques were in this movie. It's incredibly colorful. There's a lot of sequences that reminded me of like watching Gaspar Noé movies, like lots of strobe lights, and the color kind of, especially the reds, are used in really disturbing but very striking ways. And the thing that I really love the most is the way that this movie uses mostly wide-angle lenses to sort of create this feeling of you're often viewing the world through the eyes of the donkey. And it's strange because the movie is often looking at the donkey, so this isn't a POV movie or anything. But the wide-angle lens makes it seem like you're basically trapped in this donkey's eye, and you have to view the world the way he sees it. And that's exactly what I think the director is trying to do with this movie. He clearly is very sympathetic towards animals, and he's trying to get us, the audience, to perceive the world through an animal's eyes. And a lot really does come to light with this perspective. I mean, you see the way that this donkey views the world, especially humans, and you see the cruel, malicious ways humans treat each other and the world around it that really make them, you know, uniquely cold-hearted compared to any other species that has ever walked the earth. Despite the fact that it's only 88 minutes long, I could see people being like, well, you know, it's kind of hitting you over the head with the same thing the entire time. But I don't really see it that way. For me, the way it uses all these different, very unique filmmaking devices, and the way you follow this donkey throughout his sort of odyssey, really brings to life these ideas that the director is going for about animal cruelty and the world around us. And it really serves this very simple but very heartbreaking story really well. So I really loved this movie. My expectations were pretty high, but they were certainly met. I think this is my favorite foreign movie I've seen so far this year, at least ones that are nominated for the Oscars. There's other ones I might like more. But yeah, no, I'm going to give this a pretty solid 4 stars. This probably would have been in my top 10 from last year if I had seen it by then. The next film I'm going to be talking about is Women Talking, which is directed by Sarah Polley. This is another fairly simple story. It's about a group of women in an isolated religious colony that are struggling to reconcile their faith with a string of sexual assaults committed by the colony's men. And most of the movie plays out in this sort of chamber piece sequence of them having a conversation about what to do next. I heard pretty mixed things about this from, you know, it was getting a lot of very wide critical praise, but a lot of people on Letterboxd who have very similar tastes in movies to me weren't really huge on it, and I can say that after watching it, I'm also not really very huge on it. This movie got it under my skin, but in all the wrong ways. And I'm just gonna start off by talking about some technical elements, and I have to say This is one of the ugliest movies you will see all year. It is a chore to look at. The color palette is insanely desaturated and digital looking. And what's worse than just the simple aesthetic eyesore value of it is that the reason behind it looking like that is very, very shallow. I think what the idea was is probably something along the lines of, this is a really serious, intense, one location chamber piece drama with a very important subject matter. So along with that harshness of the subject matter, we should also complement that by having the visual choice be very similar. But I think this choice forgets something that is very important in all art, not just filmmaking, and that's contrast. If you don't have contrast in your art, it's going to come off as very one note and not very interesting for the viewer to look at or contemplate. I'll give you a couple of examples that I thought about when I was writing my Letterboxd review. So for example, Jackie Brown, which I talked about recently in my Tarantino video, kind of makes a point to be this very contemplative, anti-bombast, anti-spectacle crime movie, but at the same time, it still looks really, really good. It has this amazing sort of kitschy color palette to it. Is what's going on as, bombastic or crazy as something like Kill Bill? Absolutely not, but it looks very similar to sort of contrast that story that it's going for. Maybe another example, Sean Baker, who made the film Red Rocket, which is one of my favorite movies of 2021. That movie is a really intense drama about this absolute sleazeball character who just completely abuses and manipulates everybody in his life, and it's an incredibly uncomfortable viewing experience. But the film is shot absolutely gorgeously. It's 16 millimeter. It really is shot in a way that emphasizes these Technicolor neon pop art type colors to it. It's a gorgeous looking movie, and that. The beauty of that makes a really nice contrast to the disgusting subject matter. And in Women Talking, you pretty much only have the disgusting, really hard to watch subject matter. And the fact that, and it's basic, and the color palette of it is just sort of rubbing your nose in that idea. I think what the movie thinks it's doing in terms of contrast is that it's contrasting this ugliness of the film, the ugliness of what they're experienced, with fully realized characters. But the thing is, I don't think the characters in this movie are fully realized at all. I think the movie is confusing ideology for character. Despite the fact that what they're talking about in the movie is very important, it just feels, I just don't know anything about these individual people. They're not really allowed to be three-dimensional. They're not really allowed to have flaws. They're basically just there to deliver you the thematic bullet points of the movie. And so for what a miserable experience it is actually watching the movie, there's really not much that you actually get out of it on the other side, at least from my point of view. And this does feel a little bit like, an Oscar movie that is trying to grandstand and, make a movie about a very important subject matter without actually walking the walk, making the characters interesting, complicated, or having any sort of, interesting visual contrast to go with it. It's one of the most one-note movies I've seen in years, which is really sad just given how important the subject matter actually is and how much this material actually deserves somebody to make a better film. So I'm gonna give this 2 stars. I really didn't enjoy this one. And the last movie I'm gonna talk about is one that I watched last night, and that is All Quiet on the Western Front. This is another reimagining of the novel, and I believe it's the first time that a German studio has had the chance to make it. This is about Paul Baumer and his friends Albert and Müller, who are egged on by romantic dreams of heroism, and they voluntarily enlist in the German army during World War I. Full of excitement and patriotic fervor, the boys enthusiastically march into a war that they believe in. But once on the Western Front, they discover the soul-destroying horror of World War I. Maybe it's just me, but I don't feel like war movies are done that often compared to other genres. And I can see why, because I think it's one of the more difficult genres to pull off really well. I think there's more so than other genres, there's a very limited number of perspectives with which you can approach the material. And so if you don't approach the material in a new and fresh way, you run the risk of it being very derivative and shallow. But I think, like any genre, the best thing you can do is just work your hardest to approach the material with something fresh, something bold, And I think in many ways, this version of All Quiet on the Western Front does a good job with that. For a film that is getting a lot of Oscar attention and has, grossed a lot of popularity on Netflix and in the West, this is a very refreshingly bleak take on war, especially in the way it looks at war as sort of a factory of death. The violence in this movie is very, very intense, and it will be tough for some viewers, I'm sure. But for me, I would say more disturbing than the violence in the movie is actually the scenes, especially early on, like in the first 10 minutes or so, where you see a lot of the carnage on the battlefield, and then you see, officials from the army going through the corpses, taking off their dog tags, and then most disturbingly, they remove their clothes, take them back to a facility, clean them, wash them, and then give them to a new batch of recruits who were destined to go to the exact same fate. Again, it's sort of a factory line, and I really love that idea. I think that's in many ways what this film is really bringing to the war genre, at least in the mainstream anyway. But I just think that despite the idea being really good, sometimes the execution of it brings the pace and the power of the film to a bit of a halt. There are many moments in the movie in which there will be this really, really disturbing, intense battle scene, and then directly after that, they'll cut to government officials, politicians on both sides, negotiating an armistice for the end of the war. And what they're going through in that situation is very cushy, and the film is contrasting that, cushy, safe existence with the brutality of what the soldiers are going through. And again, very cool idea, plays into the sort of factory elements of it. It almost is like war as, capitalism, almost like the military-industrial complex idea. But the thing is, when the film cuts back and forth between those two things so often and so abruptly, it really does bring the power, the disturbing power that the film has to a bit of a halt, and it kind of minimizes it for me. Another thing that harms the pace of the film a little bit is that I think that it's slightly torn between being a character war film in the way that like Saving Private Ryan is, versus a very nightmare, a film about the nightmarish state of war, the way that a movie like Come and See would be. And I'm gonna be honest, I tend to prefer when war movies are a little bit more abstract, when they're a little bit less about the characters within it and more about the broader nightmarish ideas itself. And when it really brings that out in like surrealistic filmmaking, I can't think of a better war movie than Come and See. So yeah, All Quiet on the Western Front is a little bit torn between those two things, I think. But when it is committed to being very much influenced by Come and See, I think the film is absolutely at its strongest. One thing I really loved, and I don't know how much this has been talked about, is that I think the film has a lot of homages to Come and See in in some of its shots. And in particular, the way that the camera treats the lead character is very similar. The actor that they got to play Paul, I think his name is Felix Kramer or something like that. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that German pronunciation, but his face is so incredibly similar to Alexei Kravchenko, who was the lead kid in Come and See. And again, I think that the way that his character looks at the battlefield, when we just get a shot of his face, it's so hauntingly similar to that film, but it really kind of finds its own unique voice in it at the same time. And again, kind of tying in with how, I think the film is at its strongest when it's in these really disturbing, haunting battle sequences. I think the ending of this film is fantastic. Even though, like, literally in terms of the plot, what happens at the end is literal, at least from how I read it. It's just shot in such a surreal way that it almost doesn't matter if what happens to this character at the end was real or not. It's even if it's not literal, what you see is going to stick with him and and stick with everybody in this war until the end of time. And it's just, especially just given that this movie came out during the war in Ukraine, this is just such a horrifyingly relevant film, and just you really, really feel that in the way that the ending kind of ties everything together. So although I think the movie is flawed, and maybe I don't think it went quite far enough in the sort of Come and See direction as maybe it should have, I liked it a lot. I'm gonna give it 3 stars for now. I could see myself upgrading it in the future. It's probably one of the highest 3s I would give to films that came out last year. Yeah, definitely we'll be watching it again. It is a bit long, but yeah, it's certainly one of the better war films of the last few years. So yeah, that's my Oscars catch up for this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll definitely be, catching up with some of the Oscar films like Aftersun that I missed. I don't know if I'll be reviewing them, after the Oscars or anything, but I'll definitely give an update on what I think on Letterboxd. So you can follow me there or on Instagram just to sort of check that out. And then very soon, I definitely want to try and review Scream 6 before I go on a vacation in about a week, so we'll see if that happens. Pretty soon I also do want to do a little bit of a video about the movies that have scared me the most. I've been working on that for a little bit. So stay tuned for both of those things. Really appreciate you guys watching. Please subscribe if you want, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya!